In 1983, Gene Simmons met Shannon Tweed at the Playboy Mansion. It took him 28 years to marry her, but their 2011 wedding wasn't about love. It was about hiding a scandal that almost destroyed his family. Recently found footage from their reality show shows conversations that were never supposed to be seen by the public. His son got caught copying someone else's work. Legal papers from 2025 mention problems with female employees. The man who said he slept with 4,800 women is now facing trouble that goes way beyond his crazy reputation. Gene Simmons wasn't always Gene Simmons. He was born as Chaim Witz on August 25, 1949 in Haifa, Israel. His mother, Flora Klein, had just survived hell. She was born in Hungary in 1925 and had barely escaped the Nazi death camps. His father, Ferry Yechil Witz, escaped Hungary and married Flora in 1946. They moved to Israel in 1947, just before the country was born. With British forces still blocking the way, their past was full of pain. And that pain quietly followed everything he would become. By the time he turned 6 in 1955, things got worse. His parents' marriage fell apart, mostly because they had no money. His father stayed in Israel. His mother raised him alone in Tirat Carmel. She worked almost every day in factories, sewing buttons just to feed them. Sometimes they only had bread and milk for dinner. At age 7, Chaim was already trying to help. He picked wild fruit with a friend and sold it by the roadside. He knew what struggle meant. He made his first winter coat out of an army blanket. The cold didn't care, but he had no other choice. His mother worked until late at night, and he often cried himself to sleep in an empty house. At school, it didn't get any easier. Other kids bullied him for being different. Even in post-war Israel, some of the hate his mother had escaped followed him into the classroom. But something else found him too. Comic books, American ones, Spider-Man, Superman. They became his escape. He couldn't even read English yet, but he tried anyway. By age 7, he was already speaking Hebrew, Hungarian, and Turkish, and now he was secretly learning English too. All because he wanted to understand the heroes in those comics. In a world still healing from war, where food was hard to get and hope felt rare, those stories gave him something to hold on to. His mother didn't talk much about what she'd been through, but the pain was always there. By 1957, Chaim had started to see it more clearly. She had been just 14 when the Nazis forced her to work, picking potatoes in fields while soldiers watched with guns. She wore clothes marked with crosses, moving between camps, watching her world disappear one relative at a time. She didn't need to explain it with words. Her silence, her overprotectiveness, and the way she sometimes cried without reason. Chaim understood it left something in him, a need to never feel weak, to never let anyone see him break. That same year, in 1957, Flora made a decision that would change everything. With barely anything to her name, she and 8-year-old Chaim left Israel. They arrived in Queens, New York with no money, no English, and no family waiting. His father stayed behind, remarried, and started a new life. Chaim never saw him again. He became Eugene Klein and started over. Flush toilets and TV dinners amazed him, but fitting in wasn't easy. Flora worked long hours in Brooklyn factories. Sometimes 15 hours a day. Gene had to take care of himself with babysitters and learn the rules of a strange new world. He went to a Jewish school for a while, but he didn't fit in. Then he switched to public school. He graduated from Newtown High in 1967. At first, kids made fun of him for how he talked. His accent made him feel like a stranger everywhere he went, but he didn't let it break him. He sold cactuses. He picked fruit again, just like he did in Israel. Every insult, every rejection, it made him try harder. He started learning English faster by watching TV and reading more comics. That's when his love for pop culture exploded. By 1959, at just 9 years old, he legally changed his name again, this time to Gene Klein. He picked Gene after cowboy actors like Gene Autry. He was all in on being American now, even if he still lived in a cramped apartment with his mother and cousins. He fell in love with television, especially The Ed Sullivan Show. When the Beatles appeared on February 9, 1964, something inside him lit up. He wanted that life. He wanted the stage, the fame. He wanted to feel like someone, but inside he still felt like the boy with nothing. He even pretended to be British sometimes, copying the Beatles' accents just to fit in. Girls liked it. He was awkward, unsure, going through the messy changes of being a teenager. but his charm was slowly growing. During the 1960s, Gene took whatever job he could find. He worked in butcher shops, cutting meat. He worked in delis behind the counter. He earned just $1.25 an hour, but he saved every bit of it. Poverty had taught him to count every penny. He stayed away from alcohol, even at parties. He noticed how older guys got drunk and sloppy. He stayed sharp. That's how he got girls. He said it himself. He used his clear thinking while everyone else lost theirs. He started learning guitar, practicing constantly. After seeing the Beatles on TV, he couldn't stop. He formed little bands and started building his future while still in school. In 1968, he went to Sullivan County Community College. He studied education, got a 2-year degree by 1970, and even taught 6th grade in Spanish Harlem for $75 a week. But his heart wasn't in the classroom. He joined up with Paul Stanley and formed a band called Rainbow, which soon became Wicked Lester in 1970. They played at clubs at night, worked other jobs during the day. Gene even worked at a fashion magazine. He also did translation jobs using the Hungarian, Turkish, and Spanish he picked up as a kid from babysitters and neighbors. But music was where his soul lived. He tried different sounds, even recorded some solo songs under his name. All the while, he was sending money back to his mother, still carrying the weight of her survival and everything she'd lost in 1945. Then there was the part of his story that shocked even his fans. Gene Simmons says he lost his virginity at almost 14 years old in 1963. He was just a kid on a newspaper route. One winter evening, right before Christmas, he knocked on a customer's door. She answered, crying, wearing only a thin nightgown. She was a married woman. What happened next? He later described in detail in his book. It wasn't just the beginning of his sex life. In 1970, Gene Simmons teamed up with Paul Stanley along with Steve Coronel, Brooke Ostrander, and Tony Z. They formed a band called Wicked Lester. The sound was a strange mix of folk and rock, born out of the unpredictable music scene in New York City. By October 15, 1972, they had recorded a full album at Electric Lady Studios, which had been built by Jimi Hendrix. Epic Records had paid a lot to make it happen, but their A&R director, Don Ellis, absolutely hated it. He called the sound too messy and too strange for radio, so he shelved it forever. That rejection hit Gene hard. He'd poured himself into the project, and now it was dead before it even began. Furious, Gene and Paul fired Steve Coronel, brought in Ron Lejack for a short time, and then shut down Wicked Lester entirely. But that wasn't the end. After Kiss became famous, Gene and Paul paid $138,000 in 1977 to buy back the old Wicked Lester tapes, just to make sure they never got released. They feared the old sound would ruin the hard-edged image they were now building. Still, bootlegs leaked online later, showing songs like She and Love Her All I Can, which Kiss would later re-record without giving credit to the original lineup. That failed band gave birth to something bigger. By January 1973, Gene and Paul were done with compromise. They found a Rolling Stone ad placed by Peter Criss, an experienced drummer from bands like Lips and Chelsea. He joined quickly. Then they found Ace Frehley through a Village Voice ad. Together, the four of them created something entirely new. This wasn't going to be a regular rock band. It was going to be a wild, over-the-top show with makeup, fire, and fantasy, inspired by the shock rock of Alice Cooper and the glam style of New York Dolls. They launched Kiss. Their first show took place on January 30, 1973, at a small club in Queens called the Coventry, which used to be called the Popcorn Club. Only 3 people showed up, some of them girlfriends of the band. But that night, Gene breathed fire on stage for the first time. It was a show nobody forgot. Without a single hit song or any airtime on MTV, they built a following. Word spread through fan magazines and live shows, not through the radio. Within 18 months, they were headlining Anaheim Stadium in 1974. Gene later said their makeup was so strange and unforgettable that it just stuck in people's minds. It was raw, it was weird, and it was spreading. In 1973, Gene created The Demon, inspired by horror films like Black Sabbath and comic book characters like Black Bolt. He painted bat wings around his eyes and started breathing fire and spitting blood on stage. He had learned the tricks from a professional. When the band first started trying makeup, they had no real plan. Gene went for horror. Peter drew whiskers on his face like a cat. Ace made himself into a space alien. They stood in front of mirrors painting wildly. trying to make something nobody had seen before. Their early shows barely drew a dozen people dotted the Coventry. Crowds ranged from 10 to 15, sometimes fewer, but those few people left talking. Even before the internet, kids were spreading the word. Jean said it felt sticky and strange, but it was working. That makeup and fire and blood turned frustration into fascination.